In 2018, one of my favorite horror series of all time dropped on Netflix to critical acclaim. Created by Mike Flanagan, The Haunting of Hill House is one of, if not the best thing to come out of Netflix, in my personal opinion. For a horror story, it manages to be so much more than that. It's a story about love and loss and depression and family. It truly defines the horror genre in television to this day. No show before or since has captivated me as much as this.
Got us all listening. What do you want?
She's dead. She's dead.
Because it's not just horrifying, it's deeply, deeply depressing. The thing that works the best about Hill House is its characters. More on that in a second, though. This series is a loose adaptation of the novel from 1959, written by Shirley Jackson. The book also spawned two movie adaptations, one from 1963 and another from 1999. Both of these adaptations are pretty faithful to the original book. The Netflix series, however, is a completely different take on the story. The series follows a family of 7 as they move into the titular house in the early 90s. Throughout their time at the house, each family member is haunted in their own specific way, leaving them to grow up with their own unique issues, traumas, theories, and ideals. The other half of each episode takes place 25 years later and is spent reuniting the family, who have all grown apart. After a recent tragedy brings them back into each other's lives, they each deal with it in their own way. The book follows a group of paranormal investigators instead of a family. Most of the characters remain the same across adaptations, though. It's just the relationships between them that change from the book to the show. This video isn't going to be 100% a recap, as I thought it would be a lot more fun to do a character breakdown instead. With that said, I am going to be breaking down certain events that happen throughout the series so that you guys have some context for what I'm talking about. So consider this your spoiler warning for everything in The Haunting of Hill House. In this family of 7, there's the parents, Olivia and Hugh Crane, the oldest son, Stephen, the oldest daughter, Shirley, the middle child, Theo, and the twins, Luke and Nell. The family lived in Hill House until the kids' mother, Olivia, allegedly committed suicide. And I say allegedly because we don't actually get to see this woman's death at first, and neither do any of the other kids. Their father, Hugh, eventually takes them out of the house, and throughout the years, he loses custody of his children because he himself is so traumatized. 25 years later, the kids are all in different places in their lives. Stephen is a best-selling author, having written books about experiences from his own childhood. Shirley now has a fascination with death and is a mortician who runs a funeral home. Theo is a children's counselor who herself could use a lot of therapy. Luke is an addict in recovery, attending rehab, and Nellie is a traumatized widow who recently lost her husband due to a brain aneurysm. And that's just all the surface level information. I haven't even gone into their collective trauma as a family or their own very specific paranormal experiences that they had to endure while staying at Hill House. Episode 1 introduces us to all of these characters, but mainly focuses on Stephen, who himself claims to have never seen a ghost. You may also be wondering why Stephen writes all these paranormal books if he's never actually seen one. And the answer to that, my friend, is Stephen has spent years exploiting his family's personal experiences to drive book sales. More on that later, though. When I say that this is my enemy, I mean it. The episode also functions as a way to introduce us to the main tragedy in the present-day storyline. I mentioned before that Olivia, the kids' mother, committed suicide back in the 90s, which pretty much forced the kids to relocate. But there's another tragedy that hits this family just as the present-day storyline gets going. The youngest sister of the Crane family, Eleanor, aka Nell, commits died at the very end of episode 1. Earlier in the episode, she calls her older brother Steve from a hotel room and he ignores her call. She's clearly in some form of distress though. We see her older sister Shirley's phone buzz as well, again followed by another rejection. Nell then calls her father Hugh and tells him that she's at home in bed. Before the camera reveals to us, she has in fact returned to the now abandoned Hill House. Throughout the rest of the episode, we see Nellie dancing alone in a dim, uninviting hallway. The end of the episode showcases one of the most horrifying things I've ever seen put to screen. The thing that makes this so horrifying in my opinion is not the jump scare itself. It's that you just do not expect Nell to be dead. This plays into the dead all along trope. There's also the added layer of Stephen never having seen a ghost and this being his very first experience. It just makes it so bone chilling to me and unsettling. Like, I have never felt so unsettled and uncomfortable during a horror movie or horror show as I was during this very scene, because it's just so unexpected. This ultimately sets up the main thing that drives all of our characters this season. Shirley eventually embalms her sister in episode 2. Theo deals with the fact that she shut her sister out for the entire year leading up to her death in episode 3. Episode 4 sees Luke struggling to stay off the streets after being kicked out of rehab, now searching for what's been eating him alive, his own twin sister's death. And episode 5 finally tells us the story of how and why Nellie died. The final 5 episodes of Hill House paint an even darker picture than the first 5. The first half of the season is spent developing all of the siblings in their own standalone episodes, while the back half of the season sees the siblings try and recover from the news that they've lost one of their own. There's also a lot of reunions between this family, and we get an inside look into just how many strained relationships there are here in this family. The first episode of Hill House focuses on Stephen. By Stephen's own testimony, he has never seen a ghost. Despite this, Stephen has written multiple books investigating, documenting, and speculating on famous haunted locations throughout America, like the Queen Mary or Alcatraz, or even his own home from his childhood. Stephen, I would say personally, is the most vain of his siblings. He sees personal growth and success as the #1 determinant for a person's worth. This also extends to his feelings on personal health and mental well-being. We learn at some point throughout the first episode that the kid's mother was involved in some kind of freak accident. While the rest of the kids question their father about this incident quite often, Stephen himself has accepted that his mother was quote-unquote mentally ill, despite his father Hugh swearing up and down that this woman did not kill herself. In episode 6, after all the kids get together for Nell's wake, there's a huge argument between Hugh and Steve about this very topic. Nell has recently died, and Stephen calls into question her mental well-being as he believes that mental illness runs in his family.
She mentioned something in one of her monthly letters that might have raised the flag about, I don't know, her state of mind.
She said the bent neck lady was back.
There it is. Mental illness.
No, Steve.
Clear as day.
Stephen doesn't have the perspective that his other siblings and father do on his mother's death because of the fact that Stephen really didn't experience the same things as his younger siblings. I'll get a little bit more specific when I dive into the other characters, but for example, in one of many experiences like this throughout the season, on their first night in Hill House, Nellie wakes up from a nightmare to see a shadowy figure dressed in a long white nightgown, standing, staring straight at her. The woman right before her has her neck bent to a complete 90 degrees. At first, Nell is unsure what to make of this figure because, in silhouette form, she kind of resembles her mother, Olivia. Just as Nellie tries to make this deity out, the woman standing right before her lets out this guttural scream. This is who Nell will from this point forward refer to as the bent neck lady, a ghost who commonly haunts her in her dreams. No other sibling sees this exact ghost, but each of them have experiences like Nell's. Well, all except for Stephen, of course, because he's never seen a ghost. It's understandable that Stephen would claim his entire family is mentally ill, since he himself has never seen anything alarming. At the start of the season, he's a soon-to-be divorced, best-selling author who has become completely estranged from the rest of his family. During a flashback scene set a couple of years before the present day, Stephen shows his manuscript for The Haunting of Hill House to his sisters, and notably Luke is not there because I believe he is said to be in rehab at this time. During the scene, Shirley, the oldest sister, sticks up for the rest of the family, who are all against Stephen publishing their own traumatic experiences and making a profit off of them.
Shirley hit on some things that have been nagging at me. And, well, you were right. I was trying to take ownership of something that doesn't belong just to me.
So you're pulling the book?
I'm offering to share the book. I'll give each of you 8% of any royalties, and if it sells as well as my publisher thinks it will, I'm trying to do the right thing here,
The right
Cheryl.
thing?
Yeah.
What, is the guilt getting in the way of your new lifestyle?
What?
Are you and Lee feeling awkward while you pack up for California?
Yeah, whatever. This could be a significant amount of money.
Whatever? It's all about the money for you, Steve. We're well aware.
Of course it's about the money.
I mean, you guys have read it, right?
I haven't. Why bother? I've heard the various versions my whole life. I've heard Dad's tabloid horror show. I've heard Luke and Nellie's ghost stories. No offense, Nellie.
Okay.
We're not taking your money. None of us. It's blood money, Steve. You're welcome to every red cent, right?
Yep. Blood money.
Right.
This is part of what drove the rest of the siblings from each other. Stephen has basically been pushed away by everyone in the family. Not that he doesn't deserve it, because he's gone and written about all of their personal experiences without their permission. Episode 1 leaves us asking questions about how and why Nellie died, but more importantly, it develops Stephen's character by setting him up as a non-believer just to have his mind changed in the most devastating way possible. Episode 2 focuses on Shirley. Shirley has become a mortician in her adult years. She's what I like to call the control freak of the family. If Stephen is the one with the least regard for his siblings, Shirley is definitely the one that cares the most about them. This can also lead to her downfall at times, as she attempts to make everything perfect. Every single detail has to go according to her plan. Circling back to her obsession with death, Shirley has to be the one to embalm Nell. Others around her try and get her to let someone else do it.
Let someone else do it. You need to focus on you.
She's my sister. I'm hosting her funeral. I'm not leaving her in a freezer until Luke gets his shit together. She'll be there forever. I gotta get to work.
Shirley just doesn't trust anybody to do it exactly how she wants it done. The flashbacks of episode 2 tell the story of when Shirley adopted a group of stray cats. She begs her parents to let her keep them, and they eventually allow her to do so. Days later, these cats end up all dying because without their mother, they cannot live on their own. Jump forward to after her mother's death, Shirley is amazed by how the mortician fixed her mother, who was in very bad shape after her death. From this point on, Shirley has a fascination with death, something that will influence her future job. During the embalming process, Shirley has another one of her visions. Shirley is definitely tied with Stephen as one of my least favorite characters in this show. I just don't have the same emotional tie to them that I do with Nellie, Luke, or even Theo. I enjoy her a lot more in the present day, but again, she's really controlling, so that can kind of make her unlikable at times, but I love the actress that plays her. She was in Twilight, by the way. Episode 6 offers us a lot more insight into Shirley's personality. The episode's present-day storyline takes place in one central location and is made up of a series of one-take shots, some of which last longer than 15 minutes. I'll talk about that more later on, though. In the episode, everyone is in town to prepare for Nell's funeral. At the funeral home, there is a viewing, which pretty much devolves into family arguing. Eventually, Stephen and Shirley go at it about the money that he tried to pay his siblings off with. Around that time, Shirley basically forced everyone not to take the money, but unbeknownst to her, Theo and Shirley's own husband, Kevin, went behind her back to do so. Feeling betrayed by two of the closest people in her life, Shirley has a bit of a meltdown. In the beginning of the series, Theo is a bit of a hard character to nail down. There are hints throughout episodes 1, 2, and 3 to her being sensitive to temperature and touch, but we don't really get a sense of what that fully means until her flashback episode. Throughout the episode, Theo is shown to be extremely sensitive to touch. So sensitive, in fact, that she can see things in her mind when she touches objects or people. This relates to her in the present day. A now adult Theo has been going out with a woman named Trish. Trish tries to get through to Theo in order to form a closer bond with her. Theo is an incredibly closed-off personality who has basically had to grow up keeping her emotions in check due to the emotional outbursts that she used to have as a child. Another thing that's sort of hinted throughout the series is that Theo has had to turn to drinking in order to mask her sensitivities and calm them down. In episode 6, during Nell's wake, we see her get blackout drunk.
You're fucking drunk! Well, we're supposed to be honoring Nellie. You don't just stand there and dictate how we all grieve our dead. Fuck!
Throughout the episode, in the past, we see Theo is given a set of gloves by her mother, who also confesses to her that she herself has had very similar experiences to Theo with what she calls color storms. These are never fully shown, but throughout the series, we do see Liv have a couple episodes here or there where she has to calm herself down after being overwhelmed by the kids. Back in the present day, Theo goes down into the basement to see Nell, her sister, lying dead on a table. Because Theo has some sort of psychic ability, and just because she's curious to know exactly how her sister died, she touches her and something happens. One of the next times we see adult Theo is at Nell's wake, where she is acting a drunken fool. She stumbles into things, insults her siblings, and genuinely looks like she'd rather be anywhere else than with family. She gets into an argument with Shirley, who she's typically sided with, before she ends the night by kissing her sister's husband to try and feel something. In episode 8, Theo reveals to Shirley, who she's been on the outs with, that when she touched Nell, she felt absolutely nothing.
I touched her, and I felt nothing. Just nothing.
A similar thing happens to Theo the night of the escape, when she's grabbed by her own father and sees her mother in immense pain.
But I love that you're so brave. Honey?
It's become clear here that Theo's gift has really turned into a burden. It's no wonder why she pursued a career where she would get to help children out with their traumas, because she was just unable to deal with her own. And at least she'd be using her gift for good rather than constantly adding more negativity onto herself. For example, at the funeral home during the wake, Theo says,
Okay. I'm fine. Oh my God, don't touch me!
I have enough of my own grief. I don't need yours too.
Whatever that means.
subtly implying Theo carries the grief of everything and everyone she's ever touched. In the first episode and in ones that follow, the audience learns that the second youngest child named Luke grew up to be a drug addict that lies, steals, and betrays his family members on multiple occasions. It isn't until the fourth episode where we get into Luke's head and learn about the trauma he sustained as a child. On top of all that, his addiction is viewed by his siblings as a moral failing on his part. This episode seeks to explain and highlight that it's not Luke's fault he's an addict. Up until this point in episode 4, Luke isn't shown too often in the present day plots because he's the least close geography-wise to his siblings, as he's in rehab when the show begins. Instead, the show saves almost all of Luke's development for this episode. His best friend and fellow addict Joey runs away from rehab in this episode, and when he finds her, he promises to get her help. All of the shelters and rehab centers in their area are full, so Luke decides to ask around for a bed, eventually making it to his brother Steve's house to ask for money for a paid shelter. However, Steven isn't home yet, so Luke enters the apartment himself to steal something from Steve in order to pay for the hotel. Steve arrives and sees Luke stealing from him, instead offering him cash because he assumes Luke is running off to buy drugs. We get the same exact scene in the first episode, but with none of the setup I just mentioned. It's just presented to us as Luke breaking into Steve's apartment to steal from him so he can buy drugs. Luke ends up getting ditched by his friend, so he roams the streets cold and alone, filled with a hole inside. He's constantly grabbing his neck and genuinely looks like he's been taking drugs or is in withdrawal, but that is not the case. Eventually, Steve finds Luke on the street and breaks the news to him about Nell being dead. What Luke was feeling eating away at him inside was his dead sister literally decomposing. In flashbacks, we see this psychic connection between the two in action a few times.
You like it?
He loves it.
Well, how do you know that?
It's a twin thing.
Luke and Nell are definitely the closest with each other because they are the youngest and have always had each other's backs. So it's incredibly unsettling to see Luke go through a small portion of what his sister felt when she died, even without him realizing that she died. Much like her twin Luke, Nellie was absolutely traumatized while living in Hill House. In the past, Nellie is frequently shown waking up to a dark silhouette of a woman dressed in a nightgown with her neck bent to a complete 90 degrees, just staring at her. We learn that throughout the years, this vision of a tall, faceless woman never fully went away, and in fact, it got worse. Instead of simply appearing to Nell, the ghost started coming to her during actual sleep paralysis, where she would be absolutely trapped. Nellie eventually marries her sleep technician, who tries his best to help her through these difficult episodes. While her therapist and husband believe that she has unprocessed trauma from her childhood, and that might be what's causing these visions, Nellie believes that this is a genuine evil spirit haunting her, or perhaps her deceased mother watching over her in her sleep. After her husband dies of an aneurysm whilst she's having one of these episodes, by the way, Nell officially starts going off the deep end.
He was dead. He was dead and she was back.
How long had it been? Since you'd seen her, I mean.
It's been almost 2 years. I actually hadn't seen her since Arthur and I met.
It was a random tragic event.
I know it looked like an aneurysm.
It's perfectly normal to want to find something to blame.
I know what's to blame.
Hill House.
Hill House.
Her therapist gives her some of the worst advice I've ever heard from a TV show therapist. He says to return to the haunted place from her childhood in order to make peace with all of her trauma. So Nellie does this and is sort of welcomed by the house. She begins seeing younger versions of herself and her siblings playing in the foyer. Her mother walks in and Nellie ultimately falls for the house's deception. The house dresses her up and has her relive real moments from her wedding in an attempt to ease her into staying there. Nellie finally feels comfort and stability for the first time in years thanks to the house's manipulations. She's no longer ignored and silenced by her other siblings. Now she's being embraced and celebrated by them. The house basically gives Nellie the big happy family she's always wanted, before it strips it all away from her. Liv, her mother, as mentioned before, died in the house when Nell was only 6. Shortly thereafter, the children were taken from their father and lived with their Aunt Janet until they were old enough to live on their own, resulting in a whole slew of unprocessed trauma. Liv leads Nellie upstairs and gives her a necklace to wear, the same one she told her that she'd give to her once she was old enough. However, this is another facade by the house. Nellie quickly realizes that the necklace is a noose, and just like that, Liv kisses her daughter on the forehead and pushes her to hang herself. Nellie is genuinely seeing the ghost of her mother in this moment, but Liv is not the same woman that she was when she moved into the house. This house corrupts and manipulates and overtakes a person's psyche. When Nellie falls and begins hanging there, she sees her life flash before her eyes, only from the perspective of the bent neck lady. In fact, Nellie is the bent neck lady. All of those sleepless nights that Nellie had as a kid were literally her seeing her own death. The house sort of planted this seed in Nellie's head as a kid. We finally get the why and the house surrounding Nellie's death. It wasn't a suicide. It was her mother, and by default, the house. There are already a number of videos on YouTube on this very episode, because not only is episode 6 a technical wonder showcasing only like 5 or 6 major cuts throughout the entire thing, but the story of this episode is incredibly cathartic and just so extravagant in the best way possible. The flashbacks see the Crane family trapped inside their house during a bad storm. Eventually, Nellie somehow gets lost inside the house. She screams for her family to see her, but they are unable to. The present day plot sees everyone arriving at the funeral home for Nell's wake. Luke and Steven get there first, and both have a really hard time confronting the fact that their little sister is no longer with them. Even Steve, who's been relatively closed off from his siblings, struggles to see his sister in the coffin.
Yep. That's her, Detective. Positive.
Hugh then arrives and is acting really weird.
Neither can I. Look at them, they're all grown up.
What?
He sees his own children as their younger selves, which is just such a great visual, but also clues us into Hugh's mental state. Until this point, we haven't seen much of the older Hugh, and every time we have, he's talking to Olivia as if she's still alive. Most of his character development has actually come from the flashbacks, so this is really the first time we see him interact with his children since the incident. The reunion quickly devolves into a series of arguments throughout the episode between everybody, beginning with an argument between Steve and Hugh that I mentioned earlier. Steve confronts Hugh as he believes it's Hugh's responsibility to be the only one to check up on Nell. Okay, Steve, you literally ignored her call, so I don't think you have room to judge. Hugh then reveals to Steven that Nell told him the bent neck lady was back.
There it is. Mental illness. Hereditary. You let her believe all that bullshit.
You don't...
All that bullshit about Hill House, and this is the inevitable conclusion. So you hear her spout some of the crazy stuff she said when she was 6 years old, and you don't think that maybe you should get her some help?
Well, I did. I called you immediately.
Steve then brings up his mother's passing as well, citing mental illness, which, like, whatever, dude. Shirley tries to break this fight up by attacking Steve because of his blatant disregard for his siblings while writing the book, and then this happens.
You might want to check yourself before you start talking about the truth, Steve.
You took all that paranoia and craziness and you mass marketed it to jumpstart your writing career. Don't stand in plain view of Nellie's casket, lecture any of us about responsibility or well, you were happy enough to exploit all of us for some blood money. That's why none of us ever took your fucking money, Steve.
Then an argument between Shirley and Theo breaks out. Theo then reveals that she did in fact take the money from Steve.
You know what? I took the money, Cheryl. I took his fucking money. I got my degree. I started my career.
You took his money.
You'd have to be a real stubborn bitch not to.
So you just thought you'd live under my roof? No, let me get this right. Live under my roof, eat my food, and lie to my face for how many years? Guess we should have charged you rent after all.
I offered to pay rent to sanctimony.
Well, I guess you won't have a problem paying for a place of your own, will you? Use all your royalties.
You didn't get to lie to me and live off me at the same time. And call me a bitch. That's not gonna fly.
All right, slow up, Cheryl.
Fuck you! Fuck both of you! Blood money! You're out, Theo.
Stop this.
Well, after the funeral, you can fuck off back to Cali, Steve.
If I were you, I'd get down off that high horse before I fall.
If you were me, you wouldn't be such a fucking asshole.
We took the money too. I took the money, I guess.
No, you didn't.
As mentioned before, Shirley feels betrayed by all her family members, so she walks over to Nell's body and discovers buttons over her eyes. She then accuses them of doing it, and then the power goes out, causing everyone to look for flashlights and candles. The ghost of Nell haunts the funeral home, and it just brings me goosebumps every time. She's just trying to be seen by those she loves. It's even alluded to and hinted at in the beginning of the episode when Shirley says,
You know what's funny? Nellie was always trying to get all of us together in one place. Someone should have told her she didn't have to try this hard.
Later on, Luke asks his father who he thinks killed Nell because both of them believe that it was not suicide. Then Stephen and Shirley walk back into the scene and Steve starts his bullshit again, eventually blaming Hugh for Liv's death before this moment happens.
Mental illness. Mom, Nell, Dad's talking to himself all night.
It's not like that. Nell didn't kill herself, the house did. And you don't understand Hill House, Steve. You never did. And Nell and Luke, they could see its face clearer than you kids.
Dad.
Tried to keep you kids safe and to protect what memories you kids still have of your poor mother.
Got in her head.
You don't understand.
And this is what made her sick.
Your problem. It's always
My
been...
problem?
My problem
is that the wrong parent died!
Every single time I watch this scene, I get goosebumps over my entire body. I just love a good climax, and this episode's climax is probably one of my favorites of the entire show, and also just of any horror TV show episode ever. Like, that right there is how you take horror to the next level. Back in the past, Nell is finally found by her parents. She cries out,
"Honey, you're freezing." I was right here and I was screaming and shouting and none of you could see me.
Nell watches over her family in complete disarray, just begging for them to see her.
I thought the health things had got you. I thought they took you. I'm so glad you're okay.
Come on.
I'll never let you go again. Never again. I promise. I was right here. I was right here the whole time. None of you could see me.
The ending of this episode left me in complete awe of the level of storytelling that we're dealing with here. It's just an absolute masterclass in character development and pacing. When you feel like you are a character at that funeral home watching all the carnage go down, that's how you know it's really good writing. There are so many little details throughout this episode that I couldn't even begin to try and break down everything. You really just have to go and watch this episode to get the full effect of what it's saying and everything that it does accomplish storytelling-wise. In episode 1, we get our first look at the older version of Hugh. Since his wife's passing, Hugh has continued to be haunted by her, often hallucinating her presence around him. We have a pretty good sense of which of these are actual hauntings and which are just in Hugh's imagination, because sometimes the encounters are threatening and other times they are sweet. Take, for instance, in episode 5, during her wedding, Nell sees Liv standing next to Hugh, and it's a little nod to the fact that Hugh also sees Liv quite frequently. Hugh imagines his wife there with him in important situations or conversations in order to make it through unscathed. She's like his way of keeping calm and looking normal to the outside world. There's another example of this in episode 6, which I already touched on, where Hugh is seen talking to Liv throughout the night.
He's entitled.
What is that? What's that?
I said you're entitled.
In episode 7, this happens again as Hugh asks for advice on what to wear to Nell's funeral and also how he is supposed to handle his rather bratty and unforgiving children like Steve and Shirley, who are constantly giving him shit.
If you want to lecture someone, lecture Theo.
I wonder where she gets that from.
I needed my space, but not like Cheryl.
The flashback of episode 7 focuses on humanizing Hugh as well as giving us some context into Liv's descent into madness.
Liv? Liv!
Hugh?
What the fuck?
I'm sorry, I was having a horrible dream.
You're holding a fucking screwdriver to my throat.
No, I wasn't.
Hugh and Steve discover a leakage in the basement and decide to do a few repairs downstairs because that storm basically took out like that entire house basically. Like there's water running down into the basement. There's also this really interesting monologue by Mr. Dudley, the Crane's neighbor and butler, I think He just does like maintenance around the house, but there's a really good monologue by him in this episode. Dudley recalls some pretty horrific moments throughout his time working at Hill House, even warning Hugh about what could come from an extended stay there. The present day storyline of episode 7 shows the Crane family at Nell's funeral, and let's just say that does not go well at all. Seeing this eventually causes Luke to steal Shirley's credit card and run away because he wants to literally burn Hill House down. Episode 8 expands more on the flashbacks we saw in episode 7, this time from Steven's point of view. Steve sees that his mother has had a bit of a hard time recently, so he decides to remodel a vanity he found in either the attic or the basement. When he gives it to her, she thanks him before doing this.
Thank you, I love it.
Mom?
There's another flashback that clues us into Steven's relationship with his wife, whom he is now separated from in the present day. In this flashback, Steven and Lee go to the fertility doctor. However, Steven looks like he does not want to be there. More on that in a second, though. Meanwhile, the present-day plot focuses on Steven and Hugh as they drive around looking for Luke. During this drive, Hugh and Steve have another conversation, this time a bit more civil, about the house, Olivia, and Hugh's tabloid scandals, which were hinted at in the previous episode. While Steven talks about his thoughts on mental illness running in the family, he reveals to his father that he even went as far as to get a vasectomy in order to end his bloodline there. He then reveals that he kept this vasectomy from his wife, and that is the reason that they are now separated. Steven was so scared of quote-unquote messing up a potential child of his because of his theory that his whole family is insane. Also in this episode, Theo and Shirley reconcile with each other after Theo tried to get with Shirley's husband. Shirley is notified that Luke used her card that he stole in the last episode at a gas station, which tips everybody off that Luke is going to Hill House to burn the place down. The episode ends with Luke attempting to set the house on fire, only for the flame to be extinguished immediately. Episode 9 finally delivers us an answer to the question of what happened that night. The entire episode is set back in the 90s as we follow Liv as she endures many paranormal experiences just like this.
Well, come on. Shake a leg. I'm a dream, and so are you, and so are we.
Eventually, Olivia begins seeing the corpses of her grown children, Luke and Nell. The ghost from before tries to convince her to keep the children from experiencing the real world by any means necessary. At the end of the episode, Olivia, having lied about visiting her sister Janet, returns to Hill House to try and poison Luke, Nell, and the Dudleys' daughter, Abigail.
You don't have to worry now, sweetie.
About what?
I'm waking us all up.
Hugh shows up and prevents his children from drinking the poisoned tea. Abigail, however, dies, unfortunately. This is the event that caused Hugh to take all 5 kids from the house. After Hugh leaves, a delusional Liv is persuaded to kill herself by the ghosts of the house.
Why can't I wake up?
This episode is yet another one that gives me goosebumps. Carla Gugino's performance throughout this entire episode is stellar, and it's what stands out the most in this episode, I would say. I'm glad that they saved most of the explanation for the entire night for this specific episode, because if they had spoiled too much beforehand, it wouldn't have been as effective. Liv spends this entire episode sleepwalking through her life, and is completely brainwashed into thinking that her children will be eaten alive by the outside world, when that is in fact what the house is doing to her. Throughout the season, the ghost of Liv calls out to her children multiple times and usually begs them to, quote, come home. She's still trying to keep them from growing up and being in the outside world, and that's why she killed Nell in episode 5. It's such a tragic scenario as Liv is literally trying to kill her children because she thinks that she's protecting them from the outside world. In the first episode, Shirley and Nell attempt to open a mysterious red door upstairs, but are unable to. This is what the family will refer to as the Red Room from now on. Throughout the season, this mystery is put on the back burner as it's not necessarily the most important question at the time. Hugh then repeatedly attempts to open the door in episode 7, but continuously fails. In episode 9, the door is finally open, and Liv actually attempts to kill her children in it. This brings us to the finale, where in the present day, the 3 oldest Crane siblings arrive at Hill House and discover Luke inside the Red Room. Once they all make their way to the Red Room, the door locks behind them and they all pass out. The next few sequences see each of the Crane children experience a series of visions from the house. Steve's vision involves his ex-wife prey on his fear of ruining a potential baby of theirs with his family's supposed history of mental illness. Shirley's vision reveals a secret from her past where she had an affair with some guy during a business trip. Theo's vision involves her finally being intimate with Trish just as this happens.
No. 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 Theo.
And Luke's vision sees him accidentally break sobriety thanks to his friend Joey, who forced him into it. The house is using these visions to prey on each of the children's darkest fears and secrets and shames. Just as each sibling is about to be quote-unquote swallowed by the house, Nell shows up to save everyone before delivering the monologue of the century. I'm not joking, the monologue is just that good.
I feel like I've been here before. We have. All of us have. So many times and we didn't know it. Everything's been out of order. Time, I mean, I thought for so long that time was like a line, but I was wrong. Our moments fall around us like rain, or snow, or confetti. This room is like the heart of the house. No, not a heart, a stomach. It was your dance studio, Theo. It was my toy room. It was a reading room for Mom, the game room for Steve, a family room for Shirley, treehouse. But it was always the Red Room. Put on different faces so that we'd be still and quiet while it digested. Forgiveness is warm, like a tear on a cheek. Think of that and of me when you stand in the rain. I loved you completely, and you loved me the same. That's all. The rest is confetti.
As Nell says, the rest is just confetti, referring to the little moments in life, laughter with your friends, the excitement for a special occasion, and the love between family members being what truly matters. On the outside of the door, Hugh bargains with Olivia to let the children out of the Red Room in order to finally be free of the pain that she and the house has caused them. Olivia agrees and lets her children go in exchange for Hugh's life. Hugh decides to stay there with Olivia and Nell, who are joined together again as a family without regret or shame. Shirley and Theo drive Luke to the hospital, but Stephen stays behind and finally allows himself to see the ghosts residing in the house. And the house gives Steve a vision of what happened that night so he can finally get the answers he's been looking for. In the closing moments of the episode, both Stephen and Shirley reconcile with their spouses. Theo is seen moving out of Shirley's guest house with Trish before throwing her gloves in the garbage, signaling a potential for her to finally break down her walls and accept an emotional connection. Also, Luke goes back to rehab and stays clean. There's also this amazing epilogue where all the siblings celebrate Luke's 2-year anniversary sober before the series fades to black, with everyone finally being able to move on from the pain and sorrow that tethered them to the house. And with that said, I have come to the very end of this video. I hope you all enjoyed this breakdown of The Haunting of Hill House from a character point of view. Thank you all so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a wonderful day.